Divers and people who spend a lot of time underwater, what's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing you've seen while in the depths? Story 1. When I was a kid, we used to go to a place during the summer holiday which had some very nice beaches, and in particular an estuary with a very wide river mouth. One summer there was a king tide, where enough of the water emptied out of the river into the ocean that you could snorkel quite easily from one side of the river mouth to the other, as it got so shallow that it was only a meter or so deep at the deepest part. One day I decided to snorkel across from one beach to the one on the other side of the river, and about halfway across, where the depth to the bottom was maybe half a meter, I was swimming along the surface, looking down with my mask snorkel on, and a massive stingray passed directly underneath me. This thing was easily 2 meters across, covered in white scars and missing its tail. I just froze in the water, and it felt like my heart stopped. If I had have let my breath out, I would have dropped in the water low enough that I would have landed on it. It was so close. I wasn't in any danger, but having a massive creature appear so unexpectedly, so close up, was absolutely terrifying. The tail turned out to be an absolutely monstrous sea turtle. It was about the size of a mattress, exhilarating and terrifying. Story 2. Two biggest. My buddy was taking pictures. He wanted one of me surrounded by a school of fish, so I started tossing out small pieces of hot dog. I was immediately surrounded by so many perch, I couldn't see out. All of a sudden, a largemouth bass snagged one of the pieces of hot dog that was maybe 6 inches from my face. My mask blocked his approach, scared the crap out of me. Second one was a night dive in very silty water. Visibility was less than 3 ft. Lowest I mark, if I can't see my outstretched arm, it is 3 feet. We were near a flooded structure, maybe an old water tank, at about 35 feet. Something was flashing from our lights. Suddenly, I'm covered in something, and I couldn't see my light reflecting back. I pull it off my face, but it is still black, and I can feel it touching the top of my head. I try over and over to free myself, but I don't feel caught, just covered. Finally, I get clear. It was a large plastic trash bag. Keep your trash out of the water, please. Story 3. On a night dive in Scripps Canyon, a cormorant rammed directly into my dive light at high speed and knocked itself unconscious. I thought it was dead, but gently brought it back to the surface where it woke up and took off. Story 4. Got charged by a mother humpback. Her curious calf had swum around us, and we were between her and the calf. 2 of us never saw it coming. We were watching the baby, but our third diver watched her come. She kicked down and swam under us last minute. We didn't see anything until that 60th T freight train passed just underneath us. Story 5. Rescue recovery diver here. Every time I've recovered a drowning victim, I get the creeps. Unfortunately, a lot of people are under the impression that every underwater environment is like the movies and there's absolute clarity. That's rarely the case. One evening, I got called out for a young girl that jumped from a bridge. She likely survived the fall and entry. We have a morbid term for what happened to her upon hitting the water. Plugged, I found her with a surprising amount of visibility in relatively shallow water. She was stuck in the mud to just below her knees, and you could see the fear locked into her eyes' face. There is nothing peaceful about tragic end by bridge. Answer. I've heard stories about plugging. There was a tipsy guy that fell off a pier near where I live. This particular pier has strong currents and really, really thick mud with little to no solid soils and above it. This pier is home to thousands of tiny solider crabs and scavenging fish that make short work of anything. Supposedly, someone hooked him on their heavy fishing gear and pulled up his bag and what was left of him. which sort of just slopped off into mushy chunks because the consistency of his body had been destroyed by all the crabs working hard through the night. But since you're a recovery diver, have you ever seen something similar where bodies have been very quickly shredded due to crabs, etc.? I know it's a pretty full-on question, and I apologize if it brings back any unsavory visions memories. Story 6. I dropped my goggles and was trying to reach down in the river and grab it, but I pulled out a sheep skull by its sockets. Wasn't as creepy in hindsight, but 10-year-old me was scared. Story 7. I got told a story once by a Maori language teacher of mine during my time at high school. We didn't learn much Maori, just listened to stories. A dam in the Waikato, New Zealand had begun to have visible cracks in the concrete on the outside part of the dam, and some drivers were organized to dive down and check the inside submerged part of the dam for damage on that side. While they were down there was the usual debris you would find behind a man-made wall, which prevents the water from flowing as it would normally do if there wasn't a dam there. Turns out, what they thought were large. Logs were in fact huge eels, which had gotten to the size of logs due to being prevented from migrating to the sea, where they breed and die. So from being prevented from doing their natural life duties, they just get larger and larger. That would be creepy, seeing eels deep down in the water, just floating around. Story 8. You can dive in man-made lakes and check out what's left of old flooded homes and communities. It's pretty dark and spooky down there, no matter what, especially when you think of all the big fish swimming around that are barely silhouettes until they're close. My buddy likes to dive in lakes. He said the creepiest thing, by far, is finding cemeteries 100 FT beneath the water in the dark, eerie quiet. 4-day edit. I asked him about big fish. He said there's definitely shoot down there bigger than he expected, 4 or 5 feet. They're attracted to the lights and noise, but watch from a distance, which is nonetheless disconcerting, just dark, 2D shapes drifting nearby. None of the monsters other folks are bringing up, though. Story 9. I had a dive master that told me once he was diving somewhere and found a full skeleton wearing diving gear with the air on the tank turned off pretty deep down. If I remember correctly, they said they reported it to the police, and it was found out the man's wife turned off his air while they were on a dive to take down him. Story 10. I dived myself, but heard this story from a Garda diver. In 2010, a man took a test drive in a car with the salesman, and in a tragic end attempt, he drove the car off the pier into the sea and drowned. The salesman managed to escape by breaking the window and swimming to the surface. The divers were dispatched to retrieve the other man's body. This isn't in the news report, which I have a link to below for anyone interested. Simply through working in marinas at the time, I was able to be part of the conversation with the diver in question. When he got to the car, he said, the man was still facing forward, hands on the steering wheel, eyes wide. He'd been there a couple of hours now. Where it gets creepy is when the diver opened the driver door. This combined with the smashed window caused the currents to flow through the car, and the man's wide-eyed head turned around slowly with the force of it to face the diver. Story 11. When living off the coast, some buddies and I would take regular fishing trips out to the oil rigs. We would always have some lines out, and a few would dive down and try to spear some mangrove snapper or cobia. Once, while I and 2 others were diving down, checking out the structure, we decided we needed to move due to lack of life around the rig. We all get back in the boat, and as one of my buddies is reeling in a line, we had a red snapper baited on. An easily 8 to 10 ft tiger shark starts chewing on it right behind the prop, so close I could have poked his eye out. The idea that massive animal was in the water so close to me and 2 of my friends, but no one saw it, is terrifying. I bet he was watching us the whole time. Edit. Grammar. Story 12. Not unexplainable, but gave a bit of a fright. I worked as a commercial diver for about 7 years in the UK and also some work in Europe. I was working in Orkney, north of Scotland, on the fish farms. One time I swam down one of the bigger nets off Rousset, and it was very dark, very overgrown, and I could see some weird shapes lying in the dead man's sock as I descended. There were a few more dead fish than usual, maybe 100 or so, but underneath them were lying 3 dead seals, big ones. It was hard to make out because they were covered in fish, but one of the seals had a big fudge chunk of it missing. And that's when I looked up and saw a 4-foot tear in the side of the net. Fudge that. I was only a newbie at this point. Fish farm work is generally the best way to start a diving career. Doesn't pay the best, but you get plenty of minutes logged, which helps for experience. I told the supervisor, who said, "Get out straight away." They sent one of the more experienced lads in after me, and he fixed the hole sharpish and then rigged the seals up to be lifted out. Turns out, the seals had been eliminated by orca and somehow got through the net in a panic. Orca are quite common up in Orkney and are the only animal we were told you had to get out the water for if seen. Only one of the seals had a bite mark, the other 2 got caught in the net. Not supernatural or anything, but I remember a significant shiver running down my spine that day. Edit. Whoa, more responses than I've ever had on a post. To answer the question about why orcas, I was told by one of the marine environment lads who used to regularly come out on the boats with us that it's a precautionary thing. Wearing black neoprene and fins, you may be mistaken for a seal and become breakfast. To be fair, it's a precaution I was very happy to go along with. We don't get great whites or tiger sharks up here, but I'd imagine in South Africa, India, Australia, etc., there would be similar rules. Story 13. An old WW2 ammunition ship off the south coast of England was full of brass-topped shells. Most had been taken by divers over the years, and it was now very rare to see them, apart from a pile in one corner of the ship. This pile of shiny brass metals was miraculous, untouched, and remarkably clean after spending years underwater, and you only found out why if you swam near them. Out of the murky darkness, the largest eel I have ever seen snakes forward. Without exaggeration, this thing had a head the same size as a horse's head, full of jagged teeth. I could not see the body as it looped into the dark and deeper into the ship. No one got near those shells. Turns out for years this thing had been guarding the shiny brass shells, slithering over them, making them shine. We found out at the bar later that he was famous in the area and many people went to the wreck just to see him. No idea why this giant creature was guarding them like a dragon and its horde, but some said eels are like magpies and like shiny things. Edit. It has been pointed out it was probably a conger eel, not a moray. I'm honestly not sure, as it was years ago and very dark. I have updated accordingly. Story 14. When I was a kid swimming in the lake at summer camp, I dove underwater, and I swear I saw someone in scuba gear hiding underneath the dock watching us. I told the lifeguard, but he wasn't able to find anyone. Story 15. I'm a commercial diver and was once on a job cleaning a potable water reservoir. I'd been in other reservoirs before, but this was by far the biggest, at 40x 80 meters. To get in, you had to open a hatch in the ground. The whole reservoir was underground, and climb down a ladder. The hatch was in a corner, so when you were in the far corner of the reservoir, it was completely pitch black, and you just had to hope your light didn't go out. I was about halfway through a 3-hour dive when the batteries in my torch started going flat. I watched the beam get narrower and dimmer until it cut out completely. It's not a huge problem if you lose light, as you can just follow your umbilical back to the hatch. Just as I started walking back, some obnoxiously loud banging started somewhere in the reservoir. I was the only diver in there, so it both confused and scared the shoot out of me. Needless to say, I ran back to the hatch as fast as I could. I ended up getting my torch changed out and doing another hour in the water, but didn't hear the noise again. I still have no idea what it was. But the combination of my torch going out and loud banging coming from somewhere gave me a hell of a fright. Story 16. This isn't my story, but my dad's. So when he was in grad school, he did some field studies classes, some of which involved diving in Monterey Bay. One day, he was diving, counting something off of the Santa Cruz Pier, and he finds a shopping cart with bricks and cinder blocks and a chain attached to the handle. He naturally followed the chain and found a bare foot wrapped in the chain. He assumes something probably ate the rest of the body, and apparently his friends had seen similar things too. Also not mine, but my dad's friend. He says he was on a shelf counting mussels when he felt something tap his tank, and he looked around and didn't see anything. He figured it was a seal, 'cause they like to play. When he was nudged again, he saw it was a great white. He says he thought to himself, if it gets me, I can't swim it. Now I don't know if he was actually that chill, I sure wouldn't be, but that's how he tells it. Story 17. I used to teach canoeing lessons to Boy Scout troops at a local neighborhood lake. Super small lake that's not very deep, but the bottom was hella thick with vegetation. The water was dark, so you couldn't see your hands in front of you for more than like 5 inches under the surface. There was a small clubhouse, an open pavilion, and a playground all on the property. When doing lifeguard work in the water during a swim test, my sunglasses fell off my head. I dove down to find them, and shoot you not, I found a sunken, entangled hospital gurney at the bottom of the lake. It took a few people to untangle it, but how the F it got there was beyond me. Clearly, it had been under the water for years. Story 18. I've done a number of dives, and the strangest thing I ever saw was a large deep freezer with a heavy industrial chain wrapped around multiple times with about 5 cinder blocks attached. It was very, very rusted, and the deep freezer itself had to have been 30 years old, probably more. This was about 90 feet deep just off Vancouver Island, Canada. The situation gave myself and the other divers the noobie-jeebies. Logged the GPS and depth coordinates, and notified the police. We were able to find out what was inside since one of the divers had friends with local police. 10 porcelain dolls. Edit, wording and typos. Story 19. When I used to surf, I spent a good deal of time underwater, whether intentional or not. One day, I went out and surfed that was absolutely massive for me. It was 10 foot solid all day, bigger sets, serious stuff. And it was a very dark, overcast winter's day, and raining. You couldn't see shoot above the water, let alone below. At this place, the bigger it gets, the further out on the rock shelf it breaks. So I was at least 200 nautics from shore when out of the gloom towered an absolutely massive set. Enormous. As big as I'd ever encountered. There were only a handful of other blokes out there. The scariest fudge water-based experience I ever had. I fell off and this thing just took me to town. It lifted me all the way up and over the falls. I thought I was okay, but no, it was just beginning. It just kept pushing me down, further and further. My ears hurt, badly. It was completely dark, cold, even in a wetsuit. I came to rest on what seemed to be a very large, smooth rock. I could feel it with my fingers whilst I was pinned firmly to it. I was held there for what seemed like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds. But then I could sense with my feet a ferocious current that seemed to stop at the edge of the rock. It was trying to pull me over the ledge and down. I could hear it. At this point, I was panicking. Seriously. I can't quite remember how I escaped. I've rarely been that scared in all my life. I made it to the surface. I really thought I was going to pass out. I can't remember much more, but I must have paddled in so fudge fast other people noticed. They came to see what was the matter. I just sat on the beach. I could not even talk. I'm getting the fudge heebie-jeebies even reading my own recollection. Answer. I was bodyboarding on the Atlantic coast, waves not nearly as large but similar situation. Wave after wave pummeling me down against the ocean floor, totally helpless. Couldn't control my limbs due to the force of the water rushing in all directions. Felt like I was being pulled one way just to be pushed in the opposite immediately after, all while being forced to tumble along the bottom. By the time the waves finally relented and I was able to surface, I was about 100 yards further out to sea than where I had been catching waves. Luckily, the leash didn't break and I was able to leisurely paddle back to shore on my board. Without the board, I don't think I could have made it back due to exhaustion. I fell flat on my stomach on the beach, covered in cuts and scratches, coughing up water, completely wiped of energy. Truly terrifying stuff. Story 20. My story is not very exciting, but anyway. First time diving on Australia and first time diving with sharks. We start descending and the guide is at the front of the group looking for the sharkies. I'm at the back of the group. Suddenly, I turn my head left and there's this 6-foot MF about a foot or two from my face. He just swam peacefully past the group. It was a bit creepy, but lots of fun. Story 21. I used to do a lot of night dives hunting for lobster off the coast of California. We'd start at 9 or 10 at night, so everything is obviously pitch black besides where we were pointing our lights. Every so often I'd get this unshakable feeling that something big was watching or following me. Sometimes I could quiet that part of my brain and continue with the dive. Other times, I couldn't shake the feeling and would end the dive after a few minutes. It's a hard feeling to describe, but I guess I'd compare it to being in a haunted house but 50 EVFO underwater in complete darkness. Answer. I've taken some friends on a night dive before, and they joked about this exact paranoia prior to getting in the water. It probably wasn't helpful, but I told them it shouldn't be a paranoia. There is a 100 chance of this exact thing occurring, and you just have to accept it. Every night dive I've been on has some fish that like to follow you. I've even had a decent-sized nurse shark, 6 cm, just cruise behind me for an entire dive just being curious about the light. The constant feeling of discovery in the dark is what makes night diving so much fun. Story 22. Not a diver, but heard from old divers that worked for the Corps of Engineers that there's some huge catfish around the bottom of the dams, like the size of vans. Answer. My granddad used to be on a crew that dove in the Zambezi River Dam in Zimbabwe was Rhodesia, and he said there was 1 or 2 catfish in there that were so big they were eating some of the African workers semi-regularly and would wait underneath the dam where they were doing repairs. It got so bad and the proved so difficult to hunt that they ended up just pouring concrete into all the little caves underneath to either trap them or force them to move away. Story 23. I once went diving in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, where it is quite popular to see sharks. We begin diving and we are quite far from the shore. There's a cool-looking structure under us. We swim towards it to get a closer look, and I just start getting this cold feeling running through my body. And that's when a shark appeared, and I physically shat myself from fear. Answer. Not a diver, but I was on a boat just outside Plet when we encountered a group of seals out in the open water. I threw on a snorkel and hopped in the water while the seals were being curious around the boat. After a couple of minutes, the seals suddenly decided to all leave the area almost instantly. I had seen a copper shark earlier in the distance, but seals aren't afraid of something small like copper sharks. It took me about 3 seconds of floating alone to realize that this was one of the dumbest things I had ever done. The swim back to the boat was a very long 10 meters. Story 24. My dad is a diver, and once he found a dead person that was deemed missing for quite a while. The guy was fishing with a harpoon. I'm not a natural English speaker, so I can't use the correct term. And his harpoon was stuck inside the skull of a huge sea bass. He probably died because he didn't measure his breath correctly, and the bass didn't die immediately. So he actually fought back and became the harpoon was connected in the belt of the guy's belt. He couldn't escape in time, so he drowned. Point is, my dad discovered a half-decomposed body of a dead person.